Hey everybody, welcome back to Turn of the Century Games. I'm Mike. Today, I've got an EA cart for Sega Genesis. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be making this into a fun repro. So the game we have in question is College Football USA 97. Why EA Sports decided it was a great idea to make a football game, especially a college football game, for the Sega Genesis at the end of 1996, I will probably never know. EA carts, pretty interesting design. They're different from your traditional Genesis cartridges. Obviously, they're bigger. Personally, I kind of like the looks of these a little bit more. I don't like the little tabbies here that hold them together, but I generally like these more because you get more surface area for your labels. So let's go ahead and tear this apart. Just pull that right off. Sometimes you got to get like a screwdriver or something to undo it. And we've got two screws to take out. They look like they are, as we discussed in the Super Nintendo video, 4.5 millimeter. No, these are different. Damn you, EA. Even back then, they were making things difficult. Shockingly, these are 3.8 millimeter security bits. That's not very common. These were always used on the Super Nintendo carts. I've never come across a Genesis cart that actually had 3.8s in it. So that's pretty cool, actually. Never seen that before. That's a first. Alright, we're going to go ahead, carefully dump those screws out, because since I've never come across another Genesis game that uses these, I don't want to lose them. They will be necessary to put the game back together. Alright, so I'll go ahead and open this up. Genesis games, at least the EA ones, are kind of unique. So let's go over the board real quick like we did in the Super Nintendo game. Obviously you got your battery here. We went over that. That's needed for saving. You have this long chip here in the middle. This is your SRAM. Holds your save. You have a chip up here that I am not familiar with. Don't know what that does. This is an AND gate. This basically tells everything how it should operate. And here you have your ROM chip, which you can see EA stamped as College Football 97. Just like last time, we have, I can get the old case off of it, we have our handy desoldering tool. Just going to quickly go ahead and desolder this. So one thing I will go ahead and make note of, as I'm only halfway through the first row of 42 pins, well, first row of 21 pins, 42 pin chip. First thing I will make note of is that EA carts, if you're doing Genesis repros, are notoriously a little bit harder to get desoldered, which is why I'm really glad I got the new tip for my desoldering iron in the mail. One thing that I will say about this EA board that I didn't notice before I got started is that there's actually a lot of excess solder, like, just floating around on the board. Like, there's exposed traces and everything everywhere. It's just weird to see that. And I don't know if that was intentional on EA's part, or if that's going to cause issues. Like, that's so weird to see that. Moving on. Alright guys, so we got our EEPROM chip, or our mask ROM chip, sorry, totally desoldered from the board here. We're going to try to pry it up now with our little tool. The other thing that EA games are well known for is their stubbornness at coming out. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to check all of our pins, make sure our pins are all broke free. There's of course one that isn't. Now it is. Alright guys, so went ahead, removed our mask ROM chip from our board. You guys can see if I can find it here for you. Yeah, here it is. So, bad thing about EA carts is that A lot of times EA actually used a lot of solder on their boards. So the problem with that, of course, is that if they do that, it makes the chip a lot more stubborn to come out. So we did end up damaging a couple legs, but thankfully didn't damage the board at all. Regular Sega Genesis games don't have that problem. But now that we got that desoldered, we actually got to go make our ROM chip. So I'll meet you guys over at the computer. Okay guys, so here we are on our computer. A couple things we need to do to our ROM file before we get started with the burning process. So as you guys know, we are doing Mega Man the Wily Wars. I have that open here in my ROMs folder. You'll also notice this .ips file here. We're going to get to that in just a second. First thing we need to do though before we work with any reproductions on Genesis games is we have to make sure that our ROM file is in .bin format. You guys can see here that this Mega Man Wily Wars is in .md format, which stands for Magic Drive. There's also another format called SMD, which is Super Magic Drive. Basically the Magic Drives were a piracy device developed for the Sega Genesis by a third party. Obviously it was unlicensed, and it's what is used to this day to make backups of Genesis carts. Moving right along from that, first thing we need to do is we need to convert this .md format into a .bin so that we can also work with our .ips, because a .ips file will not work with a .md file. So the first program that we're going to use to do this is a program called sbwin, which can be found on romhacking.net. Again, you will find links to all the tools and applications down below in the description, guys, so make sure that you check there if you guys want to look into doing any of this yourselves. So what we're going to do in sbwin is we're going to add a file. We're going to add our Mega Man file here, and we want to make sure that its output format is set to bin, and we need to specify an output folder, so we're just going to put it right in the same folder that it came from, the ROMs folder on our desktop. That looks good to me. Hit the play button to start it, and conversion is completed successfully. So now you guys, we're done with sbwin. You guys will see over here in the ROMs folder that we now have a Mega Man Wily Wars.bin file. So what we need to do next is we actually need to patch this, because you'll remember from the Super Nintendo video, I told you guys that there were two different TV output styles back in the day, ways of doing video, in the 80s and 90s. There's NTSC and there's PAL. So in Japan and North America, you had NTSC, which ran at 60 Hz. PAL regions, most notably all of Europe, ran at 50 Hz. So we actually need to convert this ROM, since we're going to be putting it in regular, real hardware. We need to actually convert it up to 60 Hz. The nice thing about this patch here, which was actually made by, let me see if I can find his name. This patch was made by Mozilla. So what this patch does is it actually goes ahead and it converts the save features of the Mega Man Wily Wars cart, which originally used serial EEPROM, to use SRAM. Another thing that it is rumored to do, I don't know if this patch actually does this or not, but it actually also supposedly converts it to run at 60 Hz. I've made one of these carts before and it ran just fine, so we're going to assume that that is in fact what it does. Minimize out of our Edge browser here, and we're going to come over to our applications folder. We're going to run another program called Lunar IPS. This program was developed by FuSoYa over at Aeon Genesis Translations. We're going to click Apply IPS Patch, and we are going to navigate to our ROMs folder. Now in our ROMs folder we have the IPS patch for Mega Man Wily Wars, the SRAM patch. I'm going to click Open, and now it's going to ask us to specify a ROM. So it says down here, most common ROM files. You have to tick it to all files. And we're going to apply this to the .bin file. And we're going to hit Open, and file was successfully patched. We'll click OK. And we're done with Lunar IPS. You guys can see that did absolutely nothing to increase the size of our .bin file, which is good. Now, to verify that everything is correct, we're actually going to load up a program called GenSuite. I don't usually use GenSuite for much of anything because it is a very dated program. but it is good for still checking header information. So we're going to load up the header editor, and we're going to load in our .bin megaman file. Now, it's telling us the checksum is wrong. Do we want to fix it? Right off the bat, I'm going to tell you no. Do not let GenROM Suite edit your checksums. In the past, I've been burned by this program when it came to checksums. So tell it no. We have a completely separate checksum checker. But you guys can see it kept the domestic Japanese name correct. It's got the overseas name correct. Everything looks good. And you'll also notice that the target zone, mind you, this is a European game. It says so right in the thing, but this is marked now for United States. Previously, had I loaded it up, it would have said it was marked for Europe. So we're good there. We're not going to do anything here. We are just going to click close, and we are done with Gen Suite. Sayonara Gen Suite. Back to our main applications. Since Gen Suite reported that we have an incorrect checksum value, we are going to use a simple program called Fix Checksum, which can be found on romhacking.net. This is specifically for Genesis files, whereas IPS and Sum was specifically for SNES files. This program is specific to Genesis and 32X files. So we are going to load up a ROM. I'm going to load in this .bin here. And notice it says checksum incorrect. We're going to click Fix Checksum. And now it reports that it's okay. So we can go ahead and we can close it out. If we want to double check that it actually did it correctly, we can load it back in again. It should report okay. It does, so we can close that out. So now you might think, well, we've prepped the ROM. We're all ready to go. Not quite. So the programmer that I bought, the TL866, while it's a great little programmer, it doesn't have the ability to program to a chip as large as the M27C160 that we're going to be using to program Mega Man Wily Wars. It doesn't have enough pin slots. So I had to buy an adapter. You guys should see that in a picture here, pop up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen probably. This adapter requires me to split the ROM file into multiple parts and then program them one at a time to the chip. So I'm actually going to plug in our programmer here, and I'm going to show you what that process looks like on the off chance that you are using a TL866 as well. Now, there's one other thing that we need to do to our ROM, since this is a Genesis ROM, before we do anything else. And that is we have to do a byte swap. Now, you guys might remember with the SNES, we did a swap bin, which changed around the address pins. With Genesis, you have to byte swap your ROMs because all the backup devices back in the day did some weird thing that made them the way they are. And that's how emulators now interpret them. But a real Genesis actually won't interpret that. That's the best way I can come up with it. So to do this, since our programmer itself and its software doesn't have a way to do this, we're actually going to use another programmer's software, the GQX4. We're going to use its programming software to perform a byte swap, and then we are going to toss it over to our TL866 after we split the ROM. So we're going to load up our ROM here. We're going to leave all this stuff alone. Click OK. Device not selected. That's fine because I don't have a GQ. I don't have $600 to spend on one. We click buffer and we can see the output of the ROM here. This is just the standard basic stuff that you will see in the ROM. Okay, so what we need to do here is we need to do a byte swap. So to do that in the GQ programmer, we actually click this A to B button up here. This just byte swaps everything. Now watch what that ASCII text does. It jumbled it all up. That's what we needed to happen. So at this point, we can go ahead and we can save our ROM. And I'm not going to overwrite this Mega Man ROM on the off chance that something goes wrong. I want to have a clean ROM. So we're going to just label it Mega Man Swapped. And we'll save it as a bin file. Okay, now once that's done, we can go ahead and we can close out of the GQ programmer. We're totally done with it. Now, remember I said we had to go ahead and split our file. So what we have to split our file into is we have to take our 2 megabyte file and we have to split it into ½ megabyte chunks. To do that, we're going to use a program called HJSplit. So we'll load up HJSplit, and we're going to click Split. Our input file is going to be our megaman swapped.bin file. Open it up. Now down here in the split file size, we're going to type 512 because it's set up to kilobytes already. 512 kilobytes is 1/2 of a megabyte. And we're going to click Start. And that will go ahead and split all the files for us. You'll see over here in our ROM folder now that we have 4 files, Megaman swapped 001, 002, 003, 004. That's what we want. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to close HJSplit. We are done with it. Now we can jump over to our programmer's software. And I need to get out one of my M27C160s. Now the 27C160 is a 2 megabyte chip. The nice thing about Genesis games, and I don't know if I've mentioned this already or not, but the nice thing about Genesis games is that if your donor cart's game is the same file size as the reproduction that you're looking to make, unlike Super Nintendo games, you don't have to swap any pins or do any rewiring on the card or anything. It's just 1-to-1, boom, slap it in, you're done. If you're looking to put a smaller game on a bigger cart, you also don't need to do any sort of re-swapping of pins. You just slap it in and solder it in. But if you're looking to put a larger game on a smaller cart, that does require some rewiring, and unfortunately, myself personally, I've never had any luck doing that. So yeah, that's the one limitation here. Sega Genesis games, bigger game on a smaller board, I've never had any luck with it. It's not a thing. Not a thing for me. Anyways, what I need is a couple things. I need to know, I specifically need this chart here. So this chart here will actually give me the positions for the chips that I'm looking to, or the positions of the switches to program the chip that I'm looking to do. Now remember, let's look at our programming software here real quick. Remember, I said that this chip was an M27C160. What we're actually programming as up here in the select IC box is an AM27C4096. Now the 4096 is a 512 kilobyte chip. The neat thing about the M27C160 is that depending on which data lines and address pins you have active at any one time, you're programming to a 512 kilobyte bank. And this chip has 4 512 kilobyte banks. This adapter board converts the pinouts on the 160, the 322, and a few others to be able to use the 4096's pinout, and you can program them one 512 bank at a time, which is really cool. It means that we don't have to buy a $600 programmer to do this. So what we're going to do first, we're going to load in our first part of our swapped ROM. Load it in. Now, notice that this looks normal here. I want to load up the GQ programmer just to show you guys again real quick here that it actually did mess it up. Let's go ahead and we'll load up the swapped one that we actually went and split. Notice over here it's still split, switched up, and all that jazz. But over here, it's not. For some reason, the TL866 doesn't do this correctly. So there's a couple, ignoring that, because I know that if it shows up normal, here, actually, let me just go ahead and load in just the straight ROM, just to show you guys what that looks like. So this is just the regular Mega Man ROM. Notice, this is the one that's messed up. So I know that when it shows up correctly in the TL programmer, that I've got it correct. I don't know why the TL programmer does that, it just does. So we've got that. We're programming as a 27C 4060 or 4096. Remember, we actually are programming to a 27C 160. So to do this and to fool the programmer, we actually have to do a couple things. We actually have to turn off the pin detect and turn off the check ID, because otherwise the program will look at our chip and be like, hey, this isn't the right chip, and then we're screwed. We also have to turn our pulse delay down to 50. After that's done, we're good to go. So I have our pins set to the first position here. You'll notice for the 160 we do have to program 4 times, but it gives us our switch positions for each of those 4 times, so we know we're programming correctly. So I'm set up to the first set of block, and I'm actually going to do a blank check. I'm going to blank check this chip on each of the 4 sections that I have to do. Alright, so that one's blank. Come back over here. I need to push the first switch down. And we're going to check this bank. That bank is also blank. That's fantastic. So now to check spot 3, I need to put the first switch back up, second switch down, third switch up. And we're going to blank check it. Oops, wrong program. Too many times I've gone through this and not actually blank checked my chips, and I get halfway through doing this and it's like, oh, by the way, we can't actually program to this because, you know, bank number 6 on your 322 wasn't blank. Okay, so it says that all 4 banks are blank. We're going to switch this back so that we can program to the first bank. And we're going to program it. There it goes. Now it's taking the information. So I will see you guys back here once I have this totally programmed. Alright guys, got our chip all programmed. We've got our blank board here. I've cleaned it up. I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but EA games are notorious for being pains in the ass. So, Genesis game, remember, top of the EEPROM, where the notch is, I think you guys can see that, goes to the left of the cart. So that's how we're going to arrange this one. I've already bent the legs down on this because I've been trying to test fit it off camera for like the last 10 minutes. Be glad you guys didn't have to sit through that. Okay. So we got one side of the chip going in. The other side is now, of course, being a bit of a pain. I can try nudging some things. There we go. Okay. All seems to be fitting in there. So I'm going to go ahead and see. You guys can see that there. All the pins are now. You guys can kind of see it. The camera's not focused. Focus, camera. Yeah. So all the pins are through there now. Now we need to go ahead and solder all 42 pins in place. Okay, guys. So our cart, or rather our board here, totally put together. We are completely soldered in place. You guys can hopefully make that out a little bit. Totally soldered in. Now what we're going to do is we're going to reassemble our cart. So EA games are a little bit different than regular Genesis games. Regular Genesis games, when you're looking at the cart, you guys can maybe see this. So you'll notice there's a little A1 that's denoting that pin there. Basically, with regular Genesis cartridges, the front of the cart, like the front of the board, that faces the front of the system starts with B1. On EA carts, they started with A1, because of course EA had to be different, and that's a whole different video that I could go in depth with if you guys wanted me to. But just know that A on EA carts goes towards the front. We're going to go ahead, we're going to slide it back into our board here, so you guys can see there, College Football 97. It's going in on top. Okay, everything seems to be lined up. Go ahead and we'll throw our 3.8mm screws in because, again, that was just weird. I've never seen that before in an EA cart. EA, of course, had to be different. While I'm screwing this together, I guess I can go ahead and give you guys the, these are not the screws that went to this cart. I guess I can go ahead and give you guys the basics of what happened there. So EA wanted to develop for the Genesis, and Sega had a really weird system in place where they took a certain cut, you know, because obviously they're the publisher, but EA figured that the cut that Sega wanted was too much. So they clean room reverse engineered the Genesis and then started making their own carts based on their clean room reverse engineering. Once they were done with that, there was a whole lawsuit that happened, and basically Sega lost that lawsuit. So the courts sided with EA. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? But that's the TLDR version of that, which is why EA carts look so much different than regular Genesis carts. Okay, now, hopefully, I never have to take this thing back off again. So there's our rebuilt cart. Let's go check it out. Alright guys, moment of truth. College Football 97. Over here, if I can orient my phone correctly, you guys can see the Sega Genesis with a Sega CD attachment. And let's turn it on. It goes to the left. That's what it does. Oh, we got a Sega logo. Is it going to do anything past that? Yes, it is. Pick up my controller here. Been a while since I played this system. But, there's Mega Man the Wily Wars on Genesis. Go ahead and we can hit start. Jump right into Wily Wars here. You guys can see it's a compilation of all three games. The first three games. 3 different save files. I do want to check and see if it saves correctly. We're going to go ahead and load up Mega Man 1. Let's see here. I'm trying to remember the order. You know what? Let's just turn this into a Let's Play, into a playthrough video. We'll go ahead and we'll do a playthrough of Mega Man Wily Wars at some point in the future. But there it is, guys. Wily Wars, running. I'm Mike. This is Turn of Century Games. Y'all have a good one.